The Lawyer Who Rocks is brought to you by Hughes Media Law Group. You can visit HMLG at hmlglaw.com. Keep up with the podcast on social media at HMLG Law on all major platforms, and be sure to follow us there. Thank you for listening and enjoyed this episode of The Lawyer Who Rocks. My name is Joleen Winther Hughes. I am a lawyer who rocks.
When it comes to having your back, there ain't nobody better. This you better believe. Joleen.
Today is a real treat for me because my guest is a local legend of the LGBTQIA+ community and the arts community. And she wears so many hats, from fashion to art. She's a community organizer, an educator. I'm super, super excited to delve into the world of Mary Ann Carter, the founder of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Welcome. Yay. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm an admirer of what you're doing, but I always love to start from the beginning because you don't get to where you are without sort of a journey. So where are you from?
I was born in Santa Fe, but I was mostly raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. Santa Fe, I feel like that's a piece of me that makes a lot more sense. It's known as an art town, but I also think growing up in the South, definitely it could have gone two ways. It could have really suppressed that side of me, or it could just make it explode. And I feel like being in an environment where there isn't a lot of radical stuff going on just made me kind of stand out and appreciate that more where I could find it.
Being in New Mexico and in the Southwest, the art there is just kind of a magical place. Did you get to spend time there, even though you lived in Charlotte?
So I would spend long stretches of the summer there. And I always connected a lot more with the culture, as far as art. Like Georgia O'Keeffe was not just my favorite artist as a kid. She was like my favorite celebrity. I loved that she left the big city and her man to just explore art in the middle of nowhere. And I think even though Charlotte is not that and she was there, I feel like I was able to take that and remember that all I need to be creative and be myself is myself.
Well, so when did you move to the Pacific Northwest?
I moved immediately after college. So it was 2011, and I have a great aunt here, but otherwise knew no one. And I loved that part of it. I wanted just a fresh start in a city. My parents pointed out that it is the furthest contiguous state from North Carolina, but it just seemed like an adventure. And I've been here ever since and love it.
Well, you mentioned college. Did you go to school? Where did you go to school? Was it more on the East Coast or?
Yeah, I went to Virginia Tech.
So what was being in Virginia like? I've never actually been there.
Virginia is beautiful in a lot of ways. I feel like it's a little bit more progressive than North Carolina because you have people from the DC area living there. And Virginia Tech's a huge school of 30,000 people, and they have a huge ROTC program. And there's a lot of bros, but it also meant that the group of artists I found and spent time with were super tight knit. There's literally everyone that has a creative bone in their body were all friends. And it was kind of this cool generational thing where, yeah, people who had graduated still stayed connected. And even though I was in another pretty conservative place, Blacksburg, the town itself, is really cool. And I found my people.
Well, one thing we share in common is I got my undergraduate degree in communications too, and plan on going into marketing. Did you go right into marketing, like a marketing job with that degree?
No, I didn't. I moved to Seattle, worked retail for a year. And my original plan was that I wanted to be a journalist. And while Seattle does, at that time we had City Arts and The Stranger and The Weekly, I never ended up becoming a writer, but I found myself constantly drawn to the creative. And I'm definitely a go-getter and fake it till you make it, get it done. So I started freelancing. I did maintenance at an apartment complex, and then the landlord was like, "Can you make videos?" And I was like, "Sure." "Can you make a website?" "Sure." And just stayed up all night figuring out how to do all of that. So that kind of forged my ability to then go more in a direction of marketing and branding.
What was so different about Seattle and what made you love it here?
Seattle felt super special to me because it felt like a smaller city that still had big culture. I had spent some time in between semesters, like the summers in New York, and really thought that was going to be my city. And then I studied abroad in Amsterdam, and I just loved like the vibe there and how the community felt really interconnected. And yeah, it's not the largest city by population, but it felt like the quality of things going on was so much more accessible and supportive and rich. And so that really influenced my decision to kind of find a city in the US that I felt like had that. And I know that, moving here in 2011 was probably already a lot of people felt like it was the new Seattle, but I don't know. There was so much stuff going on.
Well, so as you're moving here, how did you start establishing yourself and what were the first things that you did?
It took a while for me actually to start practicing art in a way that felt kind of like career artist. For the first couple years, I think I was just like a creative person that like would make my own clothes and make elaborate gifts and like decorate my apartment. But it was like when I was about 26 that I just felt like something was missing. And I think the reason I went into journalism or tried to was the idea that it had this like white collar or like you could be an artist, but you could also have a legit job. And like that's probably the Charlotte in my background talking, like feeling like I needed that. But here's the thing about being an artist, like to me, it feels like a vocation, a calling. Like I just couldn't stay away. And so I took a screen printing class because I loved screen printing as a kid. And I just like never left the studio. So within a couple months, like I had been hired by Pratt where I took that class to teach teens, and just having that first taste have kind of embedded myself since and not looked back.
Well, tell me about how you started Jesus, Mary, and Joseph and how that concept came. And please tell us about the name.
Absolutely. Well, I think I mentioned that I went to Catholic school. I grew up super Catholic. When I was a little kid, they would always do the Hail Mary at the end of the day, and then they would close it with Jesus, Mary, and Joseph be with us on our way. But I would say until about fourth or fifth grade, I thought they were just saying Jesus, Mary, and Joseph be with us on our way. Yeah, I thought I was an important part of that. So it came from that little misunderstanding, but I think is a playful name that just kind of stuck. As far as starting Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the medium I work in most is print, which is really conducive to creating work on a lot of surfaces and also creating things like t-shirts. And so Jesus, Mary, and Joseph was kind of like my own gift shop to my art practice if my art practice was a museum, is kind of how I looked at it. Like I wanted to make accessible art that people could afford and creating kind of this little brand that sold housewares and my prints and just my creations that could be done on a accessible and affordable scale. It just grew from there.
When you're an artist, when you're a creator, like how do you come to what really sits with you that makes you feel like you're doing something wonderful?
That's a great question. I had a really inverse experience as you, which was my high school art teacher. We did like the same drawings on newsprint all 4 years. And I wanted to do collage. And he was like, what are you going to do? Become a professional collage artist? Which I think really made me take a left turn and be like, okay, maybe this isn't a possibility. But like I said, art just kind of kept creeping into my life because it feels unavoidable. It feels compulsory to me. And print was something I had done, screen printing. I took really fabulous art lessons outside of school where I was introduced to the medium. And I love installation art and creating spaces. And I found that print A is conducive to that because you can create a lot of something, but you also can influence a space through dispersing your work, whether it's, hanging screen printed posters on telephone poles or just seeing two people on the street that are wearing your shirts that you don't even know. Like, I feel like that kind of all comes back to this idea of an installation. And so I always go back to print because I just think it has so many practical applications and it's affordable. And as an artist, I can't afford a lot of artists' work. And it's nice to be able to offer something that almost anyone can afford.
Well, what is your design philosophy, would you say?
I would say, like, as far as my design process is, I really appreciate humor as a vehicle for like being able to capture attention and relay important information through a new lens. And so almost all of my designs are kind of inspired by a text based like riff I have on a current event or, just some wordplay, which goes back to my name being Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. So a lot of times, yeah, a phrase will kind of grab me and then I will create a visual representation of that. I don't know, the words come to me in weird ways. One of my most popular designs is one that says, "This bitch face does not rest." And that I was sleeping and it was like in the midst of the 2016 election. And I had this dream that I went on a date with Hillary Clinton. And somehow this phrase, like, "this bitch face does not rest," like she said that to me in this really matter of fact way, in that, yeah, like tireless women get things done, but you kind of have to be. And I woke up and was like, that phrase has so much meaning and its origin is so bizarre, but I feel lucky to have it and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to run with it.
I love that piece so much. I know it's beloved all over the place, like actually a movement around that.
It felt very topical in 2016 to, yeah, be like the resting bitch face was like a buzzword. And I feel like I actually love seeing my art be a little bit outdated in that I'm like, yeah, that design feels like it was really topical then. And there was kind of a movement around it. And now let's tackle issues that are greater than this.
I'm glad you brought that up because how does social consciousness factor into your work?
It's something that is really important to me and being constantly trying to improve and like take note of movements that are going on and like unlearn systemic behavior that I have. Like, I think it's something that a lot of people spend time doing, I hope, and they should. And because art is my medium, it feels like the best way for me to contribute. And so, as certain things will kind of like that phrase, like I will see something and I will just be like, I need to make something about this. And it's not every single thing. And there's some things that I avoid. Like everyone kept being like, I can't wait to see your Trump art. And I was just like, we do not need to give the man more attention. And so it generally just comes from being present and taking note of the times and what's happening. And if I feel like I can create work that is a contribution to that, I will.
Well, you're not just known for print, you also are very into designing hats and fashion. What do you love about that process?
I love self expression. I have a port wine stain birthmark on my face. And so I've never looked like everyone else. And my parents were awesome about it. And I've had over 100 laser surgeries on it. And I would like wear all polka dots when I got them because it would leave this like dotted bruising. And so I just really kind of played up that I didn't fit in because I felt like trying to fit in would be a lot harder than just embracing that I'm different. And so style for me has always been a great vehicle for self-expression. In my work, I want to extend that to other people. I want people to feel free to be themselves. And so I try to create, when I work with textiles, pieces that I would like to see that I haven't seen before or would inspire other people to love themselves and explore what they would like.
Is part of what you're trying to do is like allow people to feel like they're okay?
That is my most important mission, I think, in anything I make or just like what I would want to be remembered for is I want people to love themselves as they are and have fun with it. And so many people haven't been given that opportunity. And my mom used to always say, everyone has a birthmark and you're lucky yours is on your face. Cause it's kind of like, it's out there. This is my thing. And because it's obvious, I think I kind of had to like cope with that early on. It was like, I didn't have the opportunity to hide it. And so I kind of worked out that stuff earlier than a lot of people that, yeah, might be in their 40s and still struggling with getting teased for their nose or something in middle school. And I was able to see the absurdity in it because we are all different and beautiful and we should have fun with it.
How has sort of recognition of your art really changed your business?
It has absolutely afforded me more opportunities to kind of go all in for art. I now work and teach tech people art as my job. So I've gone from like having all of these things that are jigsawed into working. And like I said, absolutely do support each other. But I feel like my day now is working primarily thinking about art. And those are opportunities I got from, yeah, recognition of my work. But, I don't have a goal, which feels really good. Like there's no finish line. It feels like whenever I have an opportunity or a success that I just take that energy, or if it has a financial benefit, and just put it right back into my practice. And so a lot of people would wish that they could say, as I got more popularity, I was able to grow my business and expand it in all of these ways and, contribute to an IRA. And I'm like, no, but I fret less about making rent, and I am able to like buy a slightly more expensive type of paint or whatever. And I had time to like decorate my studio. And so it's really just like allowed me to recharge a little bit and then put it all back in my practice.
Do you find that being a business owner and an artist are those flip sides of the coin, or can you marry them a little bit?
I think there's a lot of different types of artists, and I definitely know some that are just absolutely brilliant at art and like cannot handle admin. I'm lucky that a lot of my work does translate to like branding. And so I think that like running a store is fun. I think like putting together a portfolio and a website, it to me is kind of just another art piece. It can influence each other and work well together. I definitely have to keep in check like how much time I spend packaging things versus making things. And it's easy to get totally lost in the art and then forget that you have to sell it. But it's easier, I think, to then or be excited that you're selling stuff and then you aren't generating anything new. And so that requires kind of a mental check in. But a lot of times, yeah, they kind of volley off of each other and provide variety. I love variety in everything I do. So sometimes it is nice to be like, I'm going to design stickers for my packaging instead of try to think of some conceptual masterpiece.
Tell me a little bit more about Party Hat.
Party Hat is a gallery that is in Pioneer Square. And right now, because of the pandemic, for the foreseeable future, I'm just using it as a studio because running a DIY space is challenging when there are jobs and visitors, and it's really challenging when that's not a possibility. But I don't think it's in its last iteration, and I'd love to do another space when I kind of have the capacity to do so. But the idea with it was that Seattle, as it's evolved, is kind of lacking in like DIY spaces, and people need places to congregate that are a lower barrier, both in terms of like literal access, like we're on the first floor and it's ADA accessible, and so many art spaces that are DIY because you're kind of left with like the dregs of real estate options. They're up, 2 flights of stairs and, removing so many people from the ability to see work. And so having an accessible, inclusive space was important to me on that level. And then also just on the level of wanting to make art approachable and achievable. And so I really love showing emerging artists or working with artists that are more established to do a show that they wouldn't be allowed to do anywhere else, because I've never run the gallery on a profit. I sometimes have been able to cover rent, but usually not. Usually that comes out of my pocket, and that's fine. It's a labor of love. It kind of was a gallery where the point was like, yeah, Party Hat, come have fun, come look at art, make work that inspires and recharges you. And let's take the like finance aspect off the table a little bit. I mean, it's great to sell art for both the artist and the curator, but so many galleries and so many artists, I think, get shoehorned into making things that sell. And how are we generating new and radical ideas if we're just making things that have proof that they will sell?
How do we come out of this? How do artists come out of COVID?
I mean, to start, COVID, I think because I was somebody that was working, like I said, like at least 80 hours a week on various jobs and projects, it did force me to really slow down. And then I also did want to respond because that's something I do in my work. And so at the beginning of COVID, I started a project called Mask of the Day, which now that we're a year and a half in, obviously that was pretty ambitious. I didn't know exactly where we were headed, but I made a series of art masks. This was before masks were required, but just to both encourage self-expression and kind of show possibilities and how we could have fun and still play dress up in our living room or on our walk, because those were the two options of things to do, as well as raise awareness about wearing a mask and playing your role and being socially responsible during COVID. And I think I probably made about 30 masks for that. I did not make one every day, but I've taken this time to just kind of experiment and try different things without the pressure of a show looming. You can explore things you wouldn't have had time for. The flip side of that is you're not selling artwork like you were. And I love a deadline. So not having a show meant I had to self-impose those. But for me, it's just been a journey of like wandering. And it's such an interesting time for artists because on the other hand, people have lost. Obviously, the pandemic's tragic. I also have art friends that were making more money on unemployment than they had ever made because we don't pay artists enough. And, you know, the living wage is not, so many artists aren't paid that. And so I know artists that have really found this time to be helpful to kind of get a foundation underneath them. I also know artists that kind of like quit because it was too hard, and it'll be interesting. I would think that when things kind of return to a place where you can see art in person again, hopefully some of those people start creating. But ultimately, I think this time has just been a time of self-care, and how people's art practices fall into that really varies. I also, in addition to COVID, we had the huge protests across the country, and, you know, Black Lives Matter became far more at the forefront of like society. And that is so important. And in that way, I'm pretty thankful that I think because we haven't been able to have shows, like it's allowed galleries and museums to pivot and recognize the need for more BIPOC artists. And so in some ways, like I wonder if society had just been grinding on as usual, if we would have some of the social advancements that we have today.
How can we as the art community integrate with tech to make things better and to bring the worlds together?
I think that giving tech folks the opportunity to experience art allows them to become better patrons and participants in the art community, because whether their takeaway is this is something I want to do or this is really hard, kind of seeing the artist as not just this elusive person in the shadows that like makes stuff, and more like these are people too that are drawn and motivated to use their talents to create and inspire and push new ideas. It's really not that different than what people in tech do. Like hackers, that's just an art form. I feel like working on a tech campus, the similarities stood out to me kind of more than the differences, where I'm like, oh, these people also like to roll in at 10 a.m. and then pull a late night. And like, there's creativity there. And together we can make some really cool stuff. And I think we really need both. I think the key to Seattle thriving is going to be showing both parties, artists and tech folks, how they can support each other and why it's important.
That is such a passion of mine. I really think that there's so many more similarities. My observation is on the tech side, there's a certain grind to it, especially when you work at big tech companies and the expectations and the product deadlines and all that kind of stuff. But if there was that understanding from the tech side of the artist, then I believe there would be a lot bigger market for all types of art, whether it's film or music or, you know, print art or clothing, all of that stuff. But on the other side of it, it's like it also requires that the community, maybe you coming into Seattle not being native, this helps you have a more open mind. But it also requires that people that have been native or are seeing the changes in Seattle to not be so upset about it. Like, how do you embrace it? How do you use that to your advantage to look at and say, I have an opportunity to connect with all these different people that are now here that might be displaced or might have moved here from other places and may not have a community yet other than work, right?
Absolutely. I think it is very similar to the Seattle freeze, where my philosophy to avoid it is just like, everyone wants to be complimented. Like, people are people. Like, tell someone on the bus that you like their shoes. It'll make them feel good. Like, similarly, like, some tech people just don't feel welcome in Art Walk. Invite them. Like, let them know that art can be accessible. And I don't think a lot of tech people understand the impact of what buying art could have. Like, it's not just having an aesthetic piece. It's that if you buy a $600 work of art, that $600 is like going directly to their rent or their like maybe ability to buy a plane ticket to have a show somewhere else, or even just take a vacation. Like, it is so gratifying seeing the ways that just a little bit of money can benefit artists, because there is that scarcity, and artists are a well of creativity and ingenuity and fun. And like, without money, there's never a lack of things to do. I think artists just have to say yes to everything, and you'll end up in all sorts of incredible situations. And with tech folks, they have money, but if they're like siloed in these offices all day and they're new to Seattle and then they're going home, like, not knowing that there is the opportunity to experience something different than that. Like, yeah, we just need to build some sort of bridge. And I think it can start on an individual basis, is what I'm saying. Like, tell tech people to support art.
That's the type of stuff, like, bridging all those gaps and really, starting to make things more accessible to people, and accessibility in the broadest sense of what I mean by that. Marianne, I just think that, like, learning more about all of your different support of different marginalized communities, but also your expansive integration into tech and art communities and all the different mediums you practice in, I just feel like you are a revolutionary artistic badass. And I appreciate that about you. Why do you think you're a badass?
I sometimes can look at everything I do and see chaos, or think I really need to focus in on one thing. But when I step away, I am like, yeah, it's badass that I pull all this stuff off. At the end of the day, I do feel like I'm just pulling stuff off, but it's fun. And like, I feel proud of myself that I've been able to participate in the art community, feed myself, and have fun doing all of it.
That's amazing. Well, I really, really appreciate your time today. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It was so great to meet you. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for listening to The Lawyer Who Rocks. If you've enjoyed it and want to hear more from business badasses, make sure you hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. While you're at it, please give us a review. It really helps us grow the show. The Lawyer Who Rocks is produced by Sean Fox and HMLG. If you've got an idea for a podcast, you can find Sean online at sfpodcast.com. A big thank you to Aaron Jones for our theme music, to Jeff Gilbert at Hairball Media for our awesome artwork, and thanks to my entire team at HMLG. If you need a lawyer who rocks, find us at hmlglaw.com. On the next episode,
so much of success in life and in business is just picking yourself back up, dusting yourself off, and going back to work. Because it's never going to work all the time for anybody. It doesn't matter what you do.
This podcast has been brought to you by HMLG. If you need lawyers who rock, visit us on our website at hmlglaw.com, or be sure to follow us on social media at hmlglaw or at The Lawyer Who Rocks on all social media platforms. Like a doggy daycare going on with my dog and her dog.